Good morning, everyone. We will start our webinar this morning on how to make a rain garden and why that's beneficial and what you need to do if you're going to be thinking about doing that. So I hope we will have some of our folks joining us soon. We have a fairly small registration list this morning, and we will go ahead and get started, assuming that you know how to use the Zoom features. If you don't, please well, I guess if you don't know, you wouldn't raise your hand, but there's a menu bar at the bottom for chat and for raising your hand. I'm going to launch a poll asking how you've had experience with rain gardens. And if you have anything to put in that, you can let us know. We did start on time this morning, and as I said, we have a small group, so I don't think we need to wait too long for people to come in. I don't see most folks answering that poll, so I will go ahead and end it. We may bring that up again. But meanwhile, I'm going to introduce Rob Crable, and he is with Pierce Conservation District. And Rob has a lot of experience in doing outdoor activities and management, and he will introduce himself and then we'll start the webinar. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to end that. And Rob, do you, oh, by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Janda. I'm the coordinator at the EnviroHouse, which is the facility behind me. And before we close, I will give some mention about the upcoming workshops. So with that, we will go ahead and proceed to get into our presentation. So Rob.
All right, thank you, Janda. I'm actually going to just shut my door real quick. There's a delivery truck driver and my dog's very upset about it. So he might be barking in a second.
Okay.
Okay, perfect timing, right?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen here. All right, can you see that?
Hi.
Perfect. All right, well, hello and good morning, everyone. As Janda said, my name is Rob Crable, and I'm the Green Stormwater Program Manager for the Pierce Conservation District. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Conservation District, we are a branch of state government and we are non-regulatory. We work with folks on a voluntary basis to protect, manage, and steward our shared natural resources. The Pierce Conservation District, we work within Pierce County, obviously. And my job as Green Stormwater Program Manager is to help folks implement projects that can protect and restore our water quality. I want to thank folks for joining us this morning. I know that it's not always easy jumping on at Saturday morning, but wherever you're calling from, thank you for joining. I'm calling today from my home in South Tacoma, which is on the ancestral lands of the Puyallup people who have been here since time immemorial and continue to steward the lands and our resources today. The Conservation District is extremely grateful for the leadership of the Puyallup tribe for a whole host of reasons, but specifically for having the strongest water quality standards of any government that we work with here in Pierce County. So they are an absolute leader when it comes to protecting the environment and are critically important for protecting our water. And protecting our water is important for everyone who lives here in Pierce County. No matter where you live or what it is that you like to do with water, we all are connected to it in some way. Folks love recreating along the shores, fishing. My personal favorite is looking for endangered and rare wildlife from the shores of our cities. But all of this connects to our quality of life here. And that's because at the end of the day, water is life. So if we want to preserve our quality of life here in Pierce County, we need to be conserving and protecting our water quality. And as folks know, this morning was a great example. We get a lot of water here in Western Washington. In Pierce County, folks can get anywhere between 30 to 40 inches of rainfall every single year. And that rain for a long, long time was all absorbed and soaked up by a very diverse and vibrant landscape. Prior to European colonization and the subsequent development that came with it, Pierce County and pretty much all of Western Washington was in a much more natural state where it was filled with old growth forests all the way down to camas prairies that were burned and managed by the Coast Salish people living in the region. No matter where the rain was falling, it more often than not was hitting a plant or some sort of surface that was able to absorb it. So wherever it fell on these trees, from the upper canopy all the way down to the forest floor, there were plants all along the way soaking up the rain and moving it deep, deep down into the soil through a very deep and intricate network of roots. And that's really the key and the strength to that system, which was extremely effective and efficient. Less than 1% of the water that was falling on this more natural and more permeable landscape was flowing over and into our surface waters. Instead, when we started to develop this area and put some non-natural things on the ground, like pavement and grass lawns and things like that, we start to see the increase in water that is flowing over the surface and going into water directly instead of being moved down into the soil and back down into the groundwater. And if you look at what has happened in this region over the last 50 years, you can see that the amount of water that we are moving over the surface instead of down in the ground has increased dramatically. We're essentially living in one of the largest clear cuts in the United States, and that has huge impacts when it comes to the water and how much of it is moving and what it's doing when it gets into our water bodies. And in fact, that creates one of the biggest challenges in the Puget Sound and broader Salish Sea region, and that is stormwater runoff. So when this rainwater hits these impervious surfaces, these surfaces that can't soak up the water, that's when it creates problems for us. The water is then moved off of these surfaces and into drains and pipes and moved away from the city. Some impervious surfaces are easy to identify, buildings, roads, those things are obviously not soaking up water, but other ones are less obvious. Most American lawns are made up of a species of grass that is essentially an impervious surface. It's an invasive species from Europe with extremely shallow roots that grows very tightly together. So it only will absorb about an inch or two of water before it starts pushing the rest of it off. And then, of course, as water is moving over these lawns, over the roads, over the buildings, it is picking up all of the chemicals and pollution that has been put on these surfaces, from herbicides and pesticides to oil dripping from our cars to litter and just other types of pollution. It all gets swirled into this toxic soup that goes into our storm drains and then moved off-site and elsewhere. And this is the impact of that. Most of the stormwater that we have in the region, and I think all of it in Pierce County, flows untreated and directly into our local environment. This means that where we direct the stormwater, we get these really flashy floods in places like parks and little creeks that are forming here. We also have critical infrastructure that gets impacted. The photo at the bottom is of I-5 as it goes through Chehalis, which is a city that is dealing with a lot of stormwater runoff because of inappropriate development choices that they've made. We also see a ton of pollution occurring because of stormwater runoff. It's estimated to be the largest source of pollution entering the Salish Sea, and scientists think that upwards of 75% of all pollution that we find in the ecosystem is coming from stormwater runoff. So it is a massive problem that impacts our infrastructure, that impacts our health, that impacts the ecosystem, and it comes pretty much from everywhere, especially our urban communities and our urban environments. So when it comes to addressing this issue, stormwater managers like myself and others have two big goals in mind. The first is to reduce the quantity of stormwater runoff. We want to put more of it back into the ground and send less of it into the gutters and storm drain systems that we have. And then we want to improve the quality of that stormwater. So any water that does go into our system, we want to make sure it's as clean as possible, which means reducing the amount of pollution that we put on the ground. Essentially, these two goals means that the best way to achieve them is for us to act more like nature and to incorporate nature more and more into our infrastructure and into our plans. Because at the end of the day, trees and other plants were a much more effective manager of stormwater than I or any other human managers would be. So one tool that we have to bring nature into our infrastructure and to both reduce the quantity and improve the quality of our stormwater runoff is rain gardens. These are one of my favorite green stormwater infrastructure tool, and they are extremely diverse in terms of shape, size, and location. You can have really big community ones like the one on the left, which many of you might see if you're driving around Tacoma. This is like around the 6th Ave area. You can see Hilltop Heritage, formerly Jason Lee Middle School in the background there. But they can be in community spaces collecting runoff from sidewalks and from roads, or they can be smaller residential rain gardens like the one on the right. This is actually a photo of my rain garden from a few years ago. It's changed quite a bit since then, but they can be small little ones that anybody can put into their own home. And we're going to be using this rain garden as a case study for the rest of the talk. But essentially, the main thing that all rain gardens have in common is that they are bowl-shaped landscaping features that are full of plants that we directly and intentionally move stormwater runoff into. So you can see in this diagram here, there's an inflow area where the water is coming in from. For most folks, the inflow is coming from a house or a building. That's the most common type of rain garden, but as you saw on the previous slide, you can also collect from other surfaces like streets and sidewalks. So in rain gardens, because they're bowl-shaped, they're intended to fill up with runoff, so that helps to prevent that water from going into the storm drain. It reduces the quantity of stormwater going into the system. But then as it is slowly absorbed and soaked up by the plants and the soil and all the microbiome that is in the rain garden, there's good research from the WSU Puyallup Center that shows that these systems are also cleaning the water. WSU took stormwater runoff that they got right off the road, put it into a biofiltration, which is just a fancy science way to say rain garden. And the water that came out the other end was clean enough for salmon to survive in. So it's an amazing system that really helps to achieve both of our goals. And it's a very versatile one that I think anybody can put into their own yard, especially with a little bit of help from the Conservation District and other agencies and resources. So with that, I will pause and see if there are any questions about stormwater runoff or rain gardens in general. Before we jump into the second part of the presentation, which is more of a how-to step-by-step process for installing a rain garden.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but we have had a couple of people join after we started. So I think you're mostly familiar, but if you have questions, put them in the chat and use the little drop-down menu for everyone so people can see it, and then you can copy whatever information is in the chat when we finish. So if anyone wants to, oh, I didn't launch it. That's why I'm sorry. If you want to answer the question about what the challenges are with the impermeable surfaces, then Rob can answer that and go forward. And because we do have a very small audience at the end, if there are questions that are challenging to put in a chat, raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask in person. So I'm not seeing, let's see, not seeing any answers in here yet. So okay.
Well, if folks do have other questions as they pop up, again, feel free to drop them into the chat. We'll have time to answer more questions at the end.
There was an answer on a lot of lawn and grass area.
Yeah.
So I'm going to end this and then we'll just keep moving.
Awesome. Thanks, Janda. And yeah, excess lawn is something that I hear from a lot of folks all over. There are quite a few people that we meet with who their primary goal is eliminating their grass lawn and finding better ways to utilize that space. And rain gardens is certainly one of them. Okay. So let's jump into chatting about rain gardens and seeing if one is right for you and your space. And if it is, we can talk through some of the steps to do it. I'll start off by prefacing that I installed my own rain garden myself with a little bit of sweat equity on my own part. And I was able to access various resources available to folks who live in Pierce County, which I'll talk about later. But I just really want to emphasize that anyone can do this with a little bit of time and a little bit of assistance. And it's something that is a great solution no matter where you live. So first, though, you need to determine if you have the right site for a rain garden. Not every place is going to be perfect or suitable for a rain garden. So some things to keep in mind: you want to avoid putting a rain garden directly underneath a tree or at the top of any steep slopes. When you are looking at a tree and you're underneath the canopy of it, so where its leaves are and its branches are, you're within an area called its critical root area. So any digging that happens in that area has the potential to damage and kill trees. So you don't want to put a rain garden there because, again, it's a bowl-shaped structure. So we're going to be doing a little bit of digging. So best to have it in an open space that you can do a lot of digging in. You also don't want to be at the top of any hillsides or slopes because we're moving water down into the ground. And if you're too close to a slope, then you have the potential to destabilize it. And then you can create a landslide and just a bigger mess for you to deal with down the road. You also want to stay 10 feet away from any buildings or anything with a foundation on your property. This is because, again, with water being infiltrated into the ground, you don't want it to be too close in case that excess water that is being infiltrated causes a shift in soils. A lot of soils, especially if they've been under pavement or lawns for several decades, they're not very healthy and they don't have a lot of moisture that far down. So starting to infiltrate more water in can change some of the dynamics of that soil underneath. So 10 feet away from a foundation is a safe bet that you're not going to be impacting any of your structures. And then, of course, the final one, which some folks forget about, is you need to be near a source of runoff. Rain gardens are intended to collect runoff from either a building or a hard surface like a road or a sidewalk. So if you're not near one of those, then there's really no point in creating a rain garden because it won't fill up enough for the plants to survive. If any of these become an issue for you and you're not able to do a rain garden because of size constraints or any of these constraints, do not despair. There's still lots of other things that you can do, such as just simply planting native plants instead of your grass lawn. But these are the things to keep in mind if you're going to be doing a rain garden. So if you have that space and that location available to you to build a rain garden, the next thing that you want to figure out is the size that you want it to be. And the way that we go about doing that is through a soil infiltration test. For all rain gardens, we dig out about 1.5 feet of soil to replace that really bad quality native soil with some good, healthy soils that plants will have a better chance at starting off. And plus the soil that we bring in has some good microbes in it. So to see though what the underlying soil looks like, we still need to test it and make sure that it will infiltrate and that we're not going to create a pond in anybody's backyard. So you dig down 2 feet into the ground, fill that hole halfway up with water, and then you time how quickly it takes for it to drain all the way down. That's your infiltration rate. Then based on your infiltration rates and the region that you live in, which this chart here is from the Western Washington Rain Garden Handbook. I'll share links to that at the end of the presentation. And it'll tell you sort of which region you are in for Western Washington when it comes to rainfall. And then it depends on how much of the stormwater runoff you want to collect. At the Conservation District, we're always pushing for better and best, this 95 and 100% capture rate of your stormwater runoff. So essentially, this chart, and after the infiltration test, you just line everything up to see how large your rain garden needs to be in comparison to the size of the contributing stormwater runoff structure. So, for example, let's say that I have a roof that is 1,000 square feet, and I live in Region 3, and my infiltration rate is between 2.5 and 4.9 inches per hour. That means that my rain garden needs to be 15% of the size of my 1,000 square foot roof. So I'm having a 150 square foot rain garden there. So that's the way that you calculate it. That being said, though, these charts can be a little flexible, and a good rule of thumb for anybody who's just trying to get a rough estimate is do 15% the size of your contributing area for your rain garden. Another one that we always sort of advise folks is that as long as your infiltration rate is faster than 0.5 inch per hour, your soils are great and able to do a rain garden. If it's slower than that, you can still do a rain garden. My soils drain a little bit slower than that, so my rain garden just became very, very large for the amount of water that's going into it. But we typically advise in those cases to just pursue other strategies like, again, native plantings or rain barrels or other things like that. So once you figure out the size of your rain garden, you can shape it any way that you want. Rain gardens, like I said, come in all different shapes and sizes. This is my rain garden in the back. I decided to do an oval shape to sort of tuck it up against the side of my yard and have it be up against an existing retaining wall that was already there. And I dug down 18 inches to the bottom of the rain garden. You can see here, this is my dog Zorro, who was barking at the delivery driver earlier. You can see here that the bottom of the rain garden is a little bit deeper than the slopes here. And that's because this is where most of the water is going to be accumulating over the course of the rain garden's life. So I wanted to have this be a little bit deeper to form the bottom of my bowl. Then going out to the sides, it just gradually slopes up and forms a little bit of that bowl shape even further for the rain garden. So that's the size of and the shape of the rain garden that you want to do. Again, you could do kidney shaped, you could do a straight circle, you could do a trapezoid really. They come in all different shapes and sizes. The most important thing is just to make sure that it is the appropriate size based on the amount of water going into it and your soil infiltration, and that it fits in a way that makes sense for you and your property. Once you do that, this is what you'll do next. Fill it in with the good rain garden soil. Some folks, they ask about using Tagro. If you're in Tacoma, you know about the joys and wonders of Tagro. I use it on a whole host of things, but rain gardens isn't one of them. Tagro isn't recommended for rain gardens. That being said, there are tons of different other companies and businesses in Pierce County that supply bioretention mixed soil. And that's what we want to put into the rain garden. It's just better suited at absorbing that water and helping to break down some of the pollutants in it. You also want to make sure that you get a nice thick layer of mulch on top of your rain garden. This is really important for all landscaping. Mulch helps to keep down weeds. It also helps to hold on to moisture longer, which is extremely important when we get into the summer drought season. And it adds extra nutrients that many soils in our area are deficient of. So this is, the berm that I have laid around the edge here, this isn't something that always has to happen at a rain garden, but it's something that I always recommend for folks. I like to have a little bit of a definitive buffer between the rain garden and the rest of my yard and landscaping. And plus having a berm that is elevated a few inches higher than the rain garden gives me a little bit of extra storage capacity there for water. Before you fill it in with soil though, you do want to make sure that you are trenching your inflow pipe from your house into the rain garden. When I was digging out my rain garden, I got too excited and forgot to do this, and it was a little bit of a pain to do after the fact. So don't do that, do it before you fill it in. But essentially what you'll do is you'll take your downspout that is coming off of your roof, whether you're doing 1, 2, or however many, and instead of sending it into the drain that is running into the ground and then oftentimes going straight out into the road, you bypass that with just some PVC piping so that instead it goes into your rain garden. These women here are using a sort of flexible bendy stormwater downspout, which is a great option as well. I use the PVC pipes just because they hold up a little bit longer and don't require and are a little bit sturdier when I'm throwing dirt back on top of it. But it's all dependent as to like what your goals are and how much you've got to be moving things back and forth. If you've got sort of a snaking type direction that you have to follow, then you can put that in there. So.
I have a quick question on that, Rob, before you go on.
Yeah.
If the digging and putting underground pipe to a rain garden was really challenging, or if you have a lot of runoff from different points, could you use, like we have at the EnviroHouse, could you use rain barrels collecting from the spouts and then having them interconnected and just have one inflow from a couple different rain barrels?
Yes, you absolutely can. And I actually did that recently with my rain garden. I got a rain barrel in my backyard that I use around in the garden, but when it fills all the way up, there's a little overflow pipe at the very top that then goes into a hose that I just run all the way into my rain garden. So any extra water from there then flows into the rain garden, and it's not buried, it just flows over the top, and I just covered it with mulch.
So before I put my camera off, I'll put in a little plug. We're doing a rain garden webinar next Saturday on how to make your own. So
Rain
garden, rain barrel. Sorry. Yeah. Rain barrel workshop next Saturday.
Perfect. And I'm assuming that's is that with Dan Borba?
Yes. Yeah, Dan? It is.
Yeah, Dan's great. He got me my rain barrel, so I highly recommend it for anybody looking for that as an option for stormwater runoff. But anyways, the point is that you do need to have stormwater coming into your rain garden. So,
and we did have a question that came in that said, can you dig trench and line with rocks and PVC pipe with holes to lead to the rain garden? Which I assume means like a French drain.
Yeah, you can do French drains, that sort of thing as well. I've seen that done in a lot of different cases, especially in more like parking lot situations. For most folks that are doing rain gardens in the lawn, a buried pipe tends to be the preference aesthetically for a lot of people. Another sort of thing that I've seen that's a unique way to move the water in is I've seen a woman who built a extension off of her roof, just sort of like a little awning almost, and she ran a gutter over there and had a rain chain that fell off of that directly into the rain garden. So instead of burying something, it went over through the gutters above ground. So there's lots of different unique ways to do it. This is just one solution, and it tends to be the most common one. Regardless, though, you did mention putting down rocks, and that's something that you want to make sure that you have at the inflow of all your rain gardens. Otherwise, that water, especially during heavy rain events, is just going to really tear up the soil there and cause a big muddy mess and a lot of erosion. So you always want to make sure that you have rocks at your inflow. And then if you're planning an overflow, which I recommend, you want to have it there as well.
Also a question about defining what a rain chain is.
Oh, a rain chain, it's, if you've ever seen those gutters that is just a chain that comes down off of the roof of the gutter, the rain will sort of follow that chain all the way down. So it's a decorative way to move water off of different buildings. And I think that they're really pretty, especially during the winter time. You get cool icicles that form on them. The next part, after you dig out your rain garden, fill it in with the soil, have your inflow plan and everything like that, is picking out plants. And for a good list of plants, both native and non-native ones that work well in the rain garden and in our environment, I highly recommend the Western Washington Rain Garden Handbook, which I mentioned earlier when I showed folks the chart of the soil infiltration test. But essentially, you have 3 different planting zones when you're in your rain garden. Zone 1 is at the very bottom of the rain garden. This is where the inflow is coming into. So it's where, and it's at the very bottom, so it fills up with water and holds on to water the longest. Zone 2 is that transition zone as we start to gradually go up the slope from zone 1. And that's an area where plants that like to be wet, but not as much as zone 1 will live. And then zone 3 is more of the, for lack of a better term, normal plants that don't like to be as wet. They're the ones that you'll see more regularly in people's landscaping. And they're a good border plant to have there. And while there are a ton of different species and types of plants that you can put into the various zones, I wanted to show a couple of my favorites. One is spreading rush. This is a favorite of mine because it does exactly what it says. It spreads out. This is a fast growing plant and a fast reproducing plant. I know some gardeners aren't thrilled with it because it can be really difficult to manage and maintain, but if you have space and you're fine with letting it go crazy, this is a plant that will go crazy and fill in. And for me, because I'm a lazy gardener, I like plants that do that because it means that there's less space for weeds and other ones that I don't want to fill in. If you do want to have a plant that's a little bit more controllable, and just mention spreading rush is a great zone 1 plant. It's a native species and it loves being wet. So really good one to throw at the bottom of the rain garden, especially if you're fine with it filling in. Blue-eyed grass, though, another good sort of zone 1, zone 2 plant. I tend to put it more in zone 2 areas since it doesn't like being wet for too long. But blue-eyed grass is a great one, and it doesn't spread out as quickly. So if you like to have a little bit more control over where things are going, this is a great one. It's called a grass, but it's technically not a grass. It's a type of flower. You can see the little flowers at the end of it, but it's a good evergreen. It's a near native, so it's from Idaho, not necessarily a Washington native. It's a good evergreen plant to have in the rain garden. Going out of the bottom of the rain garden and more into zone 2, kinnikinnick is another good one that many folks like to have around here. It's a good ground cover that spreads out and holds onto soils, so it's a great one for slopes. Creates these really beautiful berries that are bright red and birds love them, so a great one for zone 2. Sword ferns, these are one of my absolute favorites. I am fortunate enough that my rain garden is close enough to a large tree in my neighbor's yard that it gets shade from it. So sword ferns are good shady plants. They can tolerate a little bit more sun than some of the other ferns that we have, but most ferns need a lot of shade. So may not be the best solution for everybody since most rain gardens need to be in open areas to avoid being underneath that tree. But if you do have some shade, that's a great option for you. Oregon grape is also one that I put up here, but really Oregon grape is a bunch of different types of species because it's a very diverse sort of group. We have tall Oregon grape, which can get up to 6-8 feet in full sun. And then we have low or creeping Oregon grape, which does better in shades and acts a little bit more like kinnikinnick. If you have a sunny area that you want low growing Oregon grape, then you want to get its cousin from Eastern Washington. Creeping Mahonia is a great option. And these, like the others, are evergreen plants that provide color year round. And Oregon grapes also provide really important berries for birds and other wildlife. Snowberries, the last one that I have here, another important one for wildlife and forage. It's a native species to Washington. And the thing that makes it so important is that the berries that it produces, which are little white berries, so that's where it gets its name, snowberry, it holds on to those much later into the season than a lot of other native plants do. So it's a really important food for birds and other wildlife that are looking for food in a increasingly scarce environment as we transition from summer into winter. Snowberries are also another good one that spread out pretty aggressively. They spread out via their rhizomes, which means that they spread out with their roots. So they're one, if you have a space that needs filled in quickly, that these are a great option for it, but also one that if you have limited space and you want to be a little bit more in control, to just keep an eye on.
A question on that is snowberry, if it's not too big, can that be transplanted and successfully? Because I have a plot in the rain garden at the EnviroHouse, and I want to move it out to the big rain garden.
Yep. So with transplanting any plant, you want to kind of wait until fall or early spring. So right now we're at the time of year that we're like outside of when I would transplant it. But you want to, I like doing it in the fall because that's when things start to get a little bit more dormant, so they're less fussy. And yeah, you can take the smaller ones and you're going to be cutting into the root that they grew off of, but they should have their own root structures that they're starting to develop. Kind of like if you've seen strawberries and strawberry runners, once they get sent out, they establish their own root system, but they're still connected to the mother plant. Snowberries are kind of like that too. So you can transplant them, but I would wait until the fall to start moving them.
Right. Well, I'm going to try to cut it way back and then see what happens in the fall.
Awesome. Good luck. So once you go through all the different plants that are in the Western Washington Rain Garden Handbook, it's time for planting day. I normally recommend folks pick out 3 different species of plant per zone as an easy way to start. If you want to get more ambitious and adventurous, you are welcome to do so. I think more plants, the better. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that you can always add plants as you go. If you really have no idea where to start with plant selection, the Conservation District is able to provide some technical assistance, and through a partnership that we have with the Pierce County Master Gardeners, you have access to those folks who have just so much wisdom and so much knowledge when it comes to plants, and they can really help you out with your rain garden. In fact, my rain garden was designed by the Pierce County Master Gardeners, and I am extremely happy with it. So you'll get your plants delivered and you'll lay them out in their different pots, and then you will put them right into the ground. You can see the little bit of the bowl shape that's forming right here. This is where my inflow pipe is at the top of the rain garden. So you can see it's a little bit deeper over there. And then I have a bit of a shallower zone one that comes up here, but more of an intentional holding area down there. And then you get to watch your rain garden fill up. So as I mentioned, this area here where my inflow pipe is, it gets a lot wetter. So that's why the spreading rush is a lot happier down here than anywhere else. You can also see I've got some kinnikinnick out here to help stabilize the soil up there. But this is what a happy and functioning rain garden looks like. You have plants that are filled into the area, and you have water that is filling all the way up into zone 1 and keeping it out of our storm drains. It also, it doesn't necessarily look prettiest right now, but that's because when rain gardens are working and filling up with water, most of our plants are sleeping. So that's why it's important to always have some good evergreen plants in your rain garden so that no matter when you're taking pictures, you got something to look at. And once your rain garden is established and working, the important thing is to really, really take care of it. The first 3 years of any rain garden are really the time that you want to baby it and make sure that you are taking really good care of it. And the 3 sort of main things that I advise folks to look to plan for with a rain garden is 1, going out and pulling weeds at least 1 time per week. That may seem like a pretty big commitment, but it's really not a lot of time if you're out there at that sort of frequency. If you are waiting once a month to go out and weed your rain garden or weed any other part of your landscaping, then you're really putting a lot of work into that 1 single day. And if you're like me, that's kind of frustrating. But if you go out there once a week, I oftentimes will go out after work. Sometimes I'll have a beer with me, and it's fairly easy just to pop weeds out of the ground and toss them. Normally takes me 20, 30 minutes. The next thing that I always tell folks that they need to be doing is watering in the morning, and especially during the summer, doing it 2 or 3 times per week. Watering in the morning is really, really important. If you're watering during the heat of the day, then you're basically just wasting money and wasting water. A lot of that gets evaporated and it's not soaked up by the plants in time. So you want to get out there early in the morning. I'm out with my cup of coffee, spraying down my plants every morning in the summer. Well, not every morning, 2 or 3 times a week. And you want to give it a really, really good soak so that so that your plants have plenty of water to absorb. I do it in the morning instead of at night because plants don't like being soggy when they go to bed, which I can't blame them. I don't like being wet when I go to sleep either. So it's important to make sure that you're doing this more in the morning, or if you're doing it in the evening, try and aim towards late afternoon so that there's still some sun to dry out the plants before they go to bed, but it's not too hot that it's going to evaporate all your water. The last sort of big tip that I have is to watch for erosion. Because rain gardens intentionally fill up with water and are draining, and they have some slopes in there because of the bowl shape of the rain garden, they're just naturally predisposed to some erosion. So you want to keep an eye out on that, partially because that can fill in your inflow pipe. I've had to clean mine out about once or twice a year just with some sediment that continues to get into it. But you can decrease the amount of erosion by putting in plants that can better hold soil. And then, of course, all of these will be helped by mulch. And that's one of my biggest takeaways for anybody in any maintenance, is that mulch is your friend. They keep weeds down, it holds onto water, and it helps to protect soil from erosion. So if nothing else, learn that you need 2 to 3 inches of mulch, ideally sometimes 4 inches of mulch over your rain garden, and you want to maintain that regularly. You can get mulch from a lot of different places. There are some arborists who, when they're chopping down trees or trimming up branches, that they need places to dump it for free. So if you have arborists in your life, become good friends with them. You can also request it through different free services like Chip Drop. That's an online service, and that's where I get most of my mulch from. You can also go down to Tagro that the city of Tacoma has down by the port. And if you've got a pickup truck, they'll load up your truck with Tagro mulch, those wood chips, for I think it's just under $5 a yard. So that's a really great deal and a really great material to throw out on your rain garden. As your rain garden continues to grow and fill in, you want to continue to maintain it. Aside from just pulling weeds and keeping things watered, you'll want to be keeping an eye out for which plants do well and do not do well in your rain garden. I always tell folks that when it comes to gardening, death is part of gardening, and that means some of the plants that we put in are not going to survive. Sometimes the plant just doesn't do well, or the environment is really difficult and kills off a young plant, or plants just die and we have no idea why. There are some plants that I have put into places in my yard that they should thrive there, but they just hate it and wither away and die, and I have no idea why. So don't be afraid of death. Don't be afraid of bringing in new plants and trying things out. In my rain garden, I added some snowberries into my back, not snowberries, some salmon berries into my back corner here, just to fill in a little bit more space. And I've been swapping out some of the irises that I had in here. I had some Oregon irises that did not do as well as I wanted, so I'm swapping them out with some other flowers like Douglas irises, a cousin of the Oregon iris just from California, and also bringing in some different colors that I don't have. So I'm bringing in some Oregon sunshine, which is a nice bright orange and yellow flower instead of to complement some of the purple that I had in there. And then, of course, I think rain gardens and other gardens and green stormwater is a great place for art as well. I threw this little gnome in here. This is actually something that my brother made for me. But I think rain gardens should be a place that are also fun and celebrated with and integrate all sorts of different things, not just plants and not just water. So that's the entire process from start to finish of putting in a rain garden and caring for it into the future. And if you are excited about this and ready to get started, you are by all means free to go forth on your own. I, again, cannot recommend enough the Rain Garden Handbook for Western Washington as your one-stop shop for every little detail that you'll need on rain gardens. It's a great resource, and we'll share the link there. But if you do have any specific questions and want a little bit of help and guidance as you walk through it, you can reach out to the Conservation District and have staff come onto your property and provide you with information and help walk through some different recommendations about where to put your rain garden, the size and shape of it. And again, like I said, with the Master Gardeners, we can help you with figuring out your plant selection.
So we did have a question asking basically what you had just addressed, and I did put the chip drop link in the chat along with all the other resources you've talked about. Rob is, and I'll put his email in here again too, but as he just said, you can go to Pierce Conservation District, you can get the Rain Garden Handbook, which is really excellent. I agree with Rob on that. And I put the link in there, but also if you just Google Rain Garden Handbook, Western Washington, and I think maybe WSU or whatever, you should be able to come up with it that way. And then I'm adding some other things in here. So if you copy the chat, you can just, where you put in for your, if you're putting questions in the chat, just do, I think, a copy all, or I believe, I don't see that on there. There's someplace here you're supposed to be able to just do a drop down, but I don't see it. Anyway, you can get those resources, and I will put my contact in there so you can email me, and I can also email you everything that we've just put in the chat if that helps. So I think that answers that question.
Yeah. So and that technical assistance from the Conservation District we can provide to anyone in the county. We really focus a lot on some of our more urban watersheds, but we're happy to come out and chat with anybody about ideas for how you can implement a rain garden. If you want some assistance beyond technical assistance, some financial assistance as well, there are lots of different resources in Pierce County for folks. One is the Green Stormwater Mini Grants, which is a new-ish grant program from the Conservation District. We're going to be accepting applications later this summer for our second year of grants. And with that, it's a cost share where the Conservation District pays 75% of the project and you'll pay 25% of the cost. And it's up to $4,000 for supporting things like rain gardens, deep pave projects to remove pavement, rain tanks, so really big rain barrels, and urban wildlife habitats. There's also the Make a Splash grant, which is available from the city of Tacoma. These are $5,000 grants, and they go to supporting a host of different projects like rain gardens. They also will support some art and education projects. And then if you live in Pierce County, you live in at least one of these 3 watershed council districts. There is, I think it's $2,500 from each one of these districts per grant to support habitat restoration, green stormwater infrastructure, all sorts of things like that. And I'll also drop at the end of the talk the link to our new Green Stormwater Resources page that the Conservation District put together. And that has links to all of these grants where you can learn more about them and get on update lists to learn about when they go live. None of these grants are currently accepting applications at the moment, but some, like ours, will start up in a couple months here. Okay. And here are the different resources that I mentioned that I will be dropping in the chat here. So we have our resources page from the Conservation District. This will take you to different links, including the Rain Garden Handbook and all the different grants that I mentioned. We also are going to drop in rain garden assistance programs, and so all sorts of things like that. So, but with that, I will stop to see if there's any questions that are still in the chat here.
Okay, I haven't seen any more come in yet, but I did put your contact info in there and mine. And how do you get a copy of the chat? You should be able to I just do it by just putting my mouse in there or my cursor in there, and then I do Control Alt, which highlights everything, and then do Control C to copy it and paste it into a Word doc or a email if you might have open or whatever. But if you can't get it, I did put my link in there. As far as up a little farther, if you send jvolkmer@cityoftacoma.org or ehouse@cityoftacoma.org, I can email the whole list to you. So this will be up on the city's YouTube channel probably in about a week. It takes a little while to get it up because we only have one staff person that does that, along with other things. But it will be up so you can come back and view it later. And that link is in there also on how to get to the YouTube one. And so I think if that's everything, let's see, do we have more messages here? I don't see anything new. And I would suggest if you are really interested in doing this, come by the EnviroHouse when we're open, which will be in about 3 or 4 weeks, and check out our rain garden, and then do contact Rob because he can help you with a lot of the resources. So hopefully that answers the questions, and check in again next week for the rain barrel, and we'll get you set up so you can feed that rain garden.
Perfect.
Yeah, so thank you, Rob. Great presentation. You've updated it since I saw it last, and I like what the additions are. So thanks again, and thanks to the audience, and we will see you again. So with that, we will end the webinar, and I'll see you at some point in the next year, maybe.
Sounds good. Thanks, Janda, and thanks everyone for attending.
Bye. Have a good weekend.